Hi there, I'm Sipka, and this is the Apatros review. Now, now in this episode we basically do the D Spectrum 11, Part 1, which is the 275th episode marker. So with this we've reached the 11th installment of the D Spectrum series, this time marking the 275th review I've done. As usual, this is a recount of all the D Spectrum films I've covered in the past 25 episodes. Unlike most critics, I don't do the worst films I've covered so far, because that list will constantly be in flux. So instead I'll simply list the crappy films in each 25 review period I've done. Now for those who don't know the drill, this is essentially why I recount the films I've given a D+, which is a 3 out of 10 meaning it's disappointingly mediocre, a D, which is a 2 out of 10 meaning generally bad, or the dreaded D-, which is a 1 out of 10. Only reserved for the absolute worst crap I've come across. I don't do 0 scores or F grades since I don't believe in them. Okay, so now you know the drill, let's get this 12 party started. This is actually part 1 of the 3-part special of this D Spectrum 11, by the way. The other 2 parts will come in the coming days. Now, The Snow Creature, directed by W. Lee Wilder in the year 1954. Gave this one a D. It's bad. W. Lee Wilder was a minor director who racked up a total of 34 credits, from the crime drama The Glass Alibi in 1946 to the science fiction romance flick The Amagans in 1968, his last film. In his genre heyday in the 1950s, Wilder, a pursemaker originally by trade whose much more famous younger brother Billy Wilder tended to jokingly dismiss as a dull son of a bitch, became infamous amongst fans of cheesy B-grade 50s sci-fi for his El Cheapo films Phantom from Space and Killers from Space. As for The Snow Creature, Wilder and his screenwriter's son Miles made what was undoubtedly the first American film about the mysterious enigmatic creature we all know as the Abominable Snowman, or to use a name, the Yeti. Now the result is an exceptionally mediocre Z-grade snoozer that works great as a sleep aid or to calm sleep drawn to bliss. The Snow Creature is just plain shit. The editing is choppy, plus roughly 60% of the film is comprised of people walking, hiking or running. If I wanted to watch people walking, I'd simply leave my house and walk myself. I do love my walking. Best exercise after all. The acting is thoroughly nondescript, the dialogue is pathetic, the people of the Himalayas are all shown to be speaking Japanese instead of the local tongue, probably because they're all Japanese actors. Plus, there's numerous goofs like wet foam pretending to be snow and fake rocks that don't hurt the people they're supposed to be falling onto. Basically like Star Trek polystyrene rocks. Not to mention the introduction shot of the plane supposedly leaving Los Angeles, but the background is actually New York, bad map placement here, and mismatching clocks. The Blood Fist 4, Die Trying, directed by Paul Zilla in the year 1992. I give this one a D as well, it's bad. After the previous 3 entries in the Blood Fist series, which are getting progressively better, Blood Fist 4 Die Trying is a massive step down, and the second worst film in the series, being equal to Blood Fist 6 Ground Zero in quality, but technically above that one. Here we have a convoluted plot with elements that should go together much better than what they ultimately manage. Nuclear terrorism was a common theme in the 1990s direct-to-video action market, and without any real flow to the proceedings, making this virtually zero in the viewer's interest. That and the fighting is fairly routine stuff. Nothing stand out, although the moves are brutal and the film's body count is fairly high. The characters are simple stock cliches without any standout features, while some of them even approach idiocy. The CIA agents undercover as FBI are practically useless, while the fat police detective has the rookies deliver food to her while she's working crime scenes should be busted down in traffic duty. They're efficient time waster if you're into 99's direct-to-video action, but never up to the level of any sort of decent filmmaking. Keep My Grave Open, directed by F. Brownrigg, 1977. Give this one a D+, 3 out of 10, it's disappointing. The second last of a series of 5 films made by Texan filmmaker Cheryl Fergus Brownrigg, commonly known as S.F. Brownrigg, this 1977 proto-slasher is indicative of the director's reputation as a mediocre director who nevertheless has a modest cult reputation. Keep My Grave Open, once again the past lurid title, 1970s was the decade for awesomely nasty titles, is nothing more than a disappointing thriller that makes a fair bit of talk about but is ultimately too scared to dive into the deep end of the thriller pool. Leslie Fontaine is a mentally disturbed woman in her late 30s who lives in a remote country mansion far from the nearest town. She owns a horse, which is being looked after by a local farmhand, Stephen Tobolowsky's film debut, with a full head of hair, and occasionally heads into town to do grocery runs. The only thing odd about this is that Leslie has a brother who lives in the house with whom she seems to have more than the usual sisterly feelings with. In fact, it's actually heavily implied that the siblings have an incestuous affair, but nobody seems able to see his brother in the flesh. The other odd thing is that Leslie, whose mental state is beginning to deteriorate in recent days, is beginning to have a nasty habit of killing people. Just plain dodgy in the writing department, not terribly helped by the slow pace and the ridiculous twist ending that has the film trying to have its cake and eat it too. There was no point having the brother not being visible until the end, which is indicative of a bad script written by a writer who has no idea how to write a competent thriller and thinks he's being clever in his own mediocre way by having a twist. That being said, Camilla Carr deserves credit for keeping on the intensity for the whole runtime without letting up. Bloodfist 5 Human Target, directed by Jeff Yonas in the year 1994. We gave this one a D+, 3 out of 10. It's disappointing. This, the fifth entry in the series of 9 films, the first 8 of which starred Donald Draken Wilson, and a movie-making urban legend has it that Wilson once asked Roger Corman what the word bloodfist meant. Corman's response? It's a martial arts movie and you're in it. Whereas the 9th film is a loose remake of the first. And this 5th one has Wilson play Jim Stanton, an arms dealer working for CCP-affiliated covert agents, trying to get a supply of plutonium out of a corrupt US government official. But he is caught and while interrogated attempts to escape out of the NSA hidey hole, split opinion. But during the escape attempt, Jim is shot in the head. Surviving this comes at the cost of losing its memory, which gives the local NSA section chief, played by actor Steve James in his very last role, he died from pancreatic cancer before the film was released. A somewhat risky idea. Get Jim to believe he's Michael Wilkes, an undercover NSA agent infiltrating the terrorist ring he's actually working for. With a female agent acting as Jim's escort, and 2 other NSA agents pretending to be terrorists constantly harassing him, Jim is sent to the streets to try to recover the plutonium. But when the terrorist thugs, doing their best to track Jim down, wipe out the support staff at the NSA hideout, Jim and the female agent go on the run, completely alone and without any backup. Now, a touch better than the previous entry, although still using the previous film's 2 main themes of nuclear terrorism and identity-bending shenanigans, I thought due to some muddled writing, the net resolves not by much. The film has the expected share of gunfights and hand-to-hand combat the franchise is known for. The climax between Wilson and Steve, you're not the only one who knows the karate crap, James, is the highlight of the film. At least we get to see Steve James going over a bit of a bang. But at least the story holds up a tad better than the likes of Bloodfist 4 Die Trying, due to the plot holes actually making better sense this time around. Acting is passable despite the material the actors are given being unremarkable cliches, but at least the movie moves on a modest pace. The ending where Wilson finds out he was the terrorist he was supposed to be pretending to be makes the unobservant believe the writers went too far with the plot twists, but the observant would have guessed the plot twist long beforehand. Now, the last one for this part, Track of the Moon Beast, directed by Richard Dick Ashe in 1972, but released in 1976. Give this one a D, 2 out of 10, it's bad. The 1970s, a time when low-budget filmmakers in the minor leagues of the professional film industry would get together to make their own low-budget films without any of the dishonest cynicism that you would find today's mockbusters from the asylum. These films would have an earnest dedication to the movie craft that can, in some cases, override any lack of technical quality or acting skill to make the film a classic amongst the fans of such works. Don Dolo made his reputation of such earnestness. But not for the makers of Track of the Moon Beast. A somewhat largely forgotten 1972 low-budget monster flick has only been officially issued on VHS before the public domain status beckoned, and public domain operators like St. Clair Vision and Mill Creek took the film to add to the infamously ubiquitous multiplex and box sets. Unlike most people who take this film to be made in 1976, I consider this film to be a 1972 production, since that was the year it was completed, and the film was shelved until being finally released in 1976, with an extremely limited theatrical release, which almost nobody saw, before heading straight to television where it became a staple during the rest of the 1970s. An asteroid hits the moon, causing fragments of moon material to fly off into space. A good deal of the moon material heads towards Earth, where some of them hit the desert landscape of Albuquerque. A piece of moon rock hits mineral specialist Paul G. Carlson in the head as he shields his girlfriend from the shower while they're watching the meteor show. He comes out with only a scratch, but the fragment of moon rock in his head slowly turns into a lizard-human hybrid, who, after transforming from human to monster each night, heads out each night to munch on some long pig, in other words humans. His good friend in Navio, Professor Johnny Longbow Salinas, a man who really knows his stews to the point he gets weary listing the ingredients, realizes that this is not the first time a whale lizard of this type has walked the earth, and the fate of that creature 400 years ago is said to repeat itself for Paul. Let's just say it ain't gonna bode well for Paul the Moon Beast. This film has gained something of a negative reputation as the worst movie ever made, thanks to Mystery Science Theater 3000 and Internet Film Critic Strangers rediscovering in the past decade or so, but I've honestly seen worse movies than this. Sure, the pace is such a drag that 80 or so minutes of runtime feels more like, what, 4 hours? The acting is done by people who should never grace the acting profession ever again. It seems to be that almost the entire cast only made one acting appearance in their careers, and this happened to be it. Given the acting ranges from embarrassingly inept to just plain non-acting, Least of all, a hospital room lacking any medical equipment, even the little table that comes with a hospital bed. This isn't exactly terrible, just a pretty bad film that has plenty of unintentional hilarity to provide to seasoned hecklers and bad movie masochists. And the dedication by people who mostly never worked in the industry again must be commended. Not to mention, Track the Moonbeast is too coherent and competently handled to qualify as a D- movie. So it's bad but not atrocious. Okay, that's it for part 1 of the D Spectrum 11. I've got plenty more films to come for this special, and you'll see that in coming days. Now, by the way, I do not do requests, but if you have any questions about DVDs or films in general, just hit me up in the comment section. I'll be happy to answer. Also, if you want to know which films I have, just hit me up as well. Hope you guys are staying safe. To be continued.